Sophie stood behind the coffee counter, her feet aching as if they might give out after hours of nonstop work. The rich aroma of espresso blended with the scent of freshly baked pastries wafting through the air, but for her, it was just a faint backdrop to a long, dragging day. The clinking of cutlery, the murmurs of customers, it all felt like the slow rhythm of a marathon she didn't know when it would end. She wiped the last table by the window, checked her phone. One more hour until her shift ended, but the rent deadline was in 2 days, the phone bill was still unpaid, and the meager tips in her pocket, mostly small coins carelessly tossed on the table by customers, weren't enough to let her breathe easy. She tightened her ponytail, taking a deep breath to dispel the heaviness in her chest. Last night, she had lain awake, counting every coin in her head, wondering if there would ever be a day when she could live without the suffocating worry of money. Her smile remained as she served customers, but inside, a silent storm raged, the fear that she would be forever trapped in this cycle. The door chime rang, cutting through Sophie's chaotic thoughts. A tall, slim young man walked in, wearing a crisp white shirt and simple black trousers, but something about him made the air in the café feel thick. Following him were 2 men in black suits, their sharp eyes scanning the room like radar. Sophie froze for a moment, her pen hovering over her notepad. Her heart pounded as she realized, Barron Trump. It wasn't just because of who he was, but because his presence felt like a cruel reminder of the gulf between his world, power, wealth, and hers, a waitress with worn-out shoes and faded dreams. She approached his table, trying to maintain her professionalism. "Good afternoon. What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice soft but her hands trembling slightly, making the notepad quiver. "He's just a customer," she told herself, but her heart wouldn't settle. Barron looked up, his cold blue eyes meeting hers. In that instant, Sophie felt exposed, as if her worries, her exhaustion, the sense of inferiority she had long hidden were laid bare before him. She wondered if he looked down on her, or worse, if he pitied her. "Just a cappuccino and a croissant, please," he replied, his voice calm, almost distant. Sophie nodded and turned back to the counter, but her hands shook as she frothed the milk. It wasn't because he was famous, but because his composure made her feel smaller and more fragile than ever. He sat there, not touching his phone, just quietly looking out the window, as if the world couldn't touch him. Meanwhile, she was suffocating in her own thoughts. When she brought the tray over, she set down the coffee and croissant, forcing a smile. "Here you go," she said, her voice slightly wavering, as if begging him not to notice the weakness she couldn't hide. Barron nodded slightly, his gaze lingering on her for a moment, curious, but not judgmental. As she returned to the counter, Sophie felt her chest lighten a bit, but an indescribable unease lingered. Minutes passed, and the café returned to its quiet state, with only faint background music from the speakers. Sophie continued wiping tables, refilling sugar containers, trying to focus on her tasks to forget his presence. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw Barron pull a pen from his pocket, lean over the receipt, write something, fold it neatly, and tuck it under the empty coffee cup. He stood up, grabbed his coat and phone, and walked out with the 2 men in black suits. "Thank you for coming," she called after him, her voice gentle. He turned back, smiling slightly. "Have a good day," he said, and the farewell lingered in the air longer than necessary. As he left, the door chime rang one last time, and Sophie sighed, picking up the tray and moving to clear the table. The cappuccino cup still had some foam clinging to the rim, and the croissant plate held only crumbs. She picked up the receipt, feeling it was heavier than usual. When she opened it, the air in her chest seemed to be sucked out. Below the total was a 4-digit tip, so large it made her stomach drop. And above it, a handwritten note. "Your kindness and hard work do not go unnoticed. My family has been where you are. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming." Sophie's hands trembled as she read each word again, slowly letting them sink into her mind. Her eyes darted to the door where Barron had disappeared, and her vision blurred as hot tears welled up. Her knees weakened, and she stumbled into the chair opposite where he had sat, only able to stare at the note. It wasn't the money, though it was enough to pay her rent and more. But those words, the unexpected empathy from someone she never thought would notice her, that choked her up. The cafe door opened, pulling Sophie out of her trance. She quickly wiped her tears and tucked the note into her apron pocket as the manager, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, approached. "Are you okay? What happened?" she asked, squinting with concern. Sophie hesitated, then replied, her voice slightly breaking. "I'm fine. It's just a very generous tip." She raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. Sophie handed her the receipt. When she saw the amount, she whistled softly. "No way. Who left this?" "Barron Trump," Sophie answered, her voice lighter. Then she pulled out the note and gave it to her. After reading it, the manager's eyes softened. "Oh my, this is really special," she whispered, handing the note back. "I don't know why he wrote it," Sophie said. "I didn't do anything special." The manager looked at her for a long while. "Sometimes people just know, Sophie. They see what you're going through, even when you think you're hiding it. You're here every day, working hard, being kind to everyone, even the difficult customers." Maybe he saw that. Those words touched Sophie like a warm embrace. For months, she had struggled to pay rent, skipped meals to afford her mother's medicine, kept smiling even though her heart was breaking. And somehow, Barron had seen her, truly seen her. Whispers began to spread through the cafe. Colleagues murmured, pointing at the corner table. "Did you serve him? What was he like?" one asked. Sophie smiled faintly. "He was very kind." She didn't say more, not wanting to share the note. It remained her private treasure. At the end of her shift, as she took off her apron, the note was still safely in her pocket. On the subway home, Sophie opened it and read it again. "My family has been where you are. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming." She whispered those words, as if saying them aloud would make them true. He didn't have to care, but he did. And as the train passed through the tunnel, for the first time in a long while, Sophie closed her eyes and allowed herself to believe that things could get better. Sophie had no idea that her brief moment of peace would soon stir up a world far larger than she had ever imagined. The note she carefully kept, thinking it was a small secret, couldn't stay quiet for long. The next morning, before the sunlight could even pierce through the curtains of her cramped apartment, the phone on her nightstand buzzed incessantly. She groaned, lazily rolling over, her hand fumbling for the bright screen. Dozens of notifications flooded the lock screen, messages, missed calls, and alerts from social media. "Why are people texting me like this?" Sophie muttered, squinting at the fragmented texts. "Girl, is this you? You're famous now. Is this real?" Sophie's finger unconsciously swiped through a message with an attached link. It was a screenshot of a headline from the Daily Post. "Barron Trump leaves Waitress a touching note and a huge tip. Internet reacts." Sophie sat up, her heart pounding as if it might leap out of her chest. She clicked the link, her eyes racing over the lines. The article recounted her story with astonishing detail. A waitress struggling to make ends meet, an unexpected guest, a note full of empathy, and a tip that seemed to have changed her life. The accompanying photo was the very note Sophie had, with Barron Trump's neat handwriting. Sophie's hands trembled as she scrolled down the page. How did this happen? She opened another message from a coworker. "The guy at table 5 yesterday, someone must have taken a photo of the note. It's everywhere." Sophie's heart melted. She quickly scanned through social media accounts, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and indeed, the note had spread like wildfire. Hundreds of comments poured in. "This is what the world needs more of. Barron Trump seems like a kind person. I don't care what people say. This is wonderful. What about the waitress? I hope she's okay." The more she read, the more overwhelmed Sophie felt. Strangers were discussing her story, her life, without knowing anything about her. She dropped the phone onto the bed and buried her face in her trembling hands. "What do I do now?" Sophie whispered to herself. Her mother's cough from the next room pulled her back to reality. She couldn't let herself drown in this chaos. There were still bills to pay, groceries to buy. But as Sophie grabbed her bag and hurried out the door to work, a dull ache still twisted in her stomach. She wasn't ready for her story to belong to the whole world. The cafe that day was not like any other. When Sophie pushed open the door, she immediately felt the eyes on her. Coworkers smiled at her in a strange way, proud, almost admiring. A few regular customers looked up from their coffee, their eyes scrutinizing as if to confirm she was indeed the waitress from the article. The manager greeted Sophie with a beaming smile. "You're a local hero now," she teased. Sophie muttered, I don't feel like one. The manager placed a hand on her shoulder, her voice reassuring. What happened yesterday was special, Sophie. Not everyone gets to be part of something like that. Those words should have comforted Sophie, but instead, she only felt exposed. She wasn't special. She was just a waitress doing her job. Barron Trump didn't do it for attention, and neither did Sophie want it. But as she tied her apron and stepped onto the floor, she felt the weight of invisible eyes from around the world. Sophie spent the morning dodging questions from customers and coworkers, forcing a smile when someone mentioned the kind young man or what he wrote to you. By lunchtime, everything exploded. A film crew parked in front of the cafe, bringing cameras, microphones, and blinding lights. Sophie groaned as she saw reporters gathering near the entrance, chatting with the manager. Her stomach churned when a reporter caught her eye and waved politely. A coworker teased, "You're so lucky, Sophie." But she just wanted to hide behind the counter, pulling out her phone to check the latest headlines. Comments flooded in faster than Sophie could keep up. That note probably saved her life. This is a lesson in kindness. Small gestures mean everything. More stories like this, please. Somewhere in the chaos, Sophie sensed a fragile glimmer of hope. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about kindness, about people remembering that small actions can still make a big difference. But Sophie still had to face a decision. Should she appear on TV? When her shift ended, the cafe felt suffocating under the weight of attention. Sophie slipped out the back door, avoiding the film crew still camped outside. As her sneakers hit the pavement, Sophie exhaled, as if shedding the invisible gazes. The road home was unusually quiet, but inside Sophie, a storm was still swirling. Her phone buzzed with a message from the manager. "They want you on TV. The morning show called me." Sophie froze, the idea making her skin crawl. Going on television, telling her story? No, that wasn't her. She didn't want her face to appear on screens across the country. But a small voice whispered, "Wouldn't it be better to explain? To tell the world that it's not about money or fame, but about kindness." Sophie stared at her phone for a long time before putting it back in her pocket. Her answer would have to wait. At home, Sophie found her mother sitting in the armchair, flipping through TV channels. A familiar voice came from the TV. A simple note left by Barron Trump for a hardworking waitress is melting hearts across the nation. Sophie froze at the threshold. On the screen was a blurry photo of the note, with the headline, "A quiet act of generosity sparks a national conversation." Her mother looked up, coughing softly. "That's you, isn't it?" Sophie sighed, dropping her bag on the floor. "Yes, it's me." Her mother gestured for Sophie to sit beside her. "It's good that Mom knows. People need stories like this." Sophie crossed her arms, muttering, "I didn't ask for it." Her mother took her hand, her voice gentle. "Sometimes good things find you when you're not looking. What he wrote is special, and people are talking because they need to believe that kindness still exists in the world. You're part of that now." Sophie swallowed hard, her eyes welling up. Her mother was right. The note wasn't just about her. It was about hope, about reminding people that kindness still has power. That night, as she lay in bed, Sophie stared at the ceiling. Her phone kept buzzing, but she didn't bother to check. Under her pillow, the note lay quietly, a reminder that someone had seen her, and for the first time, Sophie didn't feel invisible. The next day, Sophie made her decision. She called the manager. "I'll do it. Appear on the morning show. But I don't want to talk about the money. I want to talk about the note, about kindness. That's all." The interview took place simply, but for Sophie, it was a tremendous challenge. She sat on the couch in the studio, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, trying to hide the nervousness that made them tremble slightly. The studio lights were blinding, the cameras pointed directly at her, and the host leaned forward, her warm voice resonating. "Sophie, you've become the center of attention in the past few days for something very unexpected, a note and a tip from Barron Trump. Can you tell us how you felt when you first read it?" Sophie paused for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady herself, carefully choosing each word. "Honestly, I was very surprised," she began, her voice slightly shaky but gradually becoming steadier. "Not because of the money, but because of what he wrote. I've been going through a really tough time, and those words, they meant more than anything I can explain." The host nodded, her eyes gentle, then read the note aloud. "Your kindness and hard work do not go unnoticed. My family has been where you are. Stay strong, brighter days are coming." Sophie, what do you think he meant by these words? Sophie glanced quickly at the camera, and in that moment, she felt like she was speaking to millions of viewers through the screen, not just the host. I think he meant that we all go through hard times, no matter who you are, no matter where you come from. And sometimes, when you're at your worst, a small act of kindness can change everything. It reminds you that someone sees you, and you're not alone. The entire studio fell silent for a brief moment, the weight of Sophie's words hanging in the air. The host smiled warmly. That's a beautiful message, Sophie. If Barron is watching, is there anything you'd like to say to him? Sophie's voice trembled slightly, but her smile was radiant, her eyes sparkling with emotion. Just thank you, not for the money, but for seeing me, for reminding me to hold on to hope. You've made more of a difference than you can imagine. When the interview aired, Sophie didn't open her phone to check the comments or read the headlines. Instead, she returned to the cafe the next day, tying her apron around her waist as usual, but feeling much lighter inside. The cafe was busier than ever that day. Customers smiled at her differently, not just because they knew her story, but because Sophie now felt seen. People began leaving kind notes on napkins, adding a little extra to their tips, or simply saying thank you with deeper sincerity. Sophie kept Barron's note in her wallet, like a small treasure, a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness can bring great hope. She realized that sometimes, the smallest gesture can change someone's life, whether it's a warm word, a helping hand, or simply letting someone know they matter. No matter how tough life gets, Sophie understood that brighter days are always coming, and sometimes, all we need is a reminder. Sophie's story is not just a beautiful moment that moves us. It's a living testament to the power of kindness and empathy. In modern life, when everything seems swept away by the fast pace and indifference, Barron Trump's small act ignited a flame of hope, not just for Sophie, but for millions who witnessed this story. For me, it affirms a truth. No matter who you are, a small act of kindness can make a tremendous difference, touching hearts and bringing light in the darkest days. The lesson I draw from this is, we never know the true impact of the good we do. A kind word, a sincere smile, or a small gesture of care can become a great source of strength for someone. Sophie had faced difficult months, but it was the unexpected empathy from a stranger that helped her feel valued and less alone. That's the value of human connection, something we sometimes inadvertently forget amidst the busyness of life. I believe this story is a reminder for all of us. Slow down a little, care a little more, and spread kindness whenever possible. Because who knows, a simple act of yours today might be the light guiding someone tomorrow. If Sophie's story has moved you, take a minute to share your thoughts. What do you think about the power of kindness? Have you ever experienced or witnessed a similar meaningful moment? I'd love to hear your story, as those shares will continue to spread hope and inspire those around us. If you love warm and meaningful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more interesting content. I promise to bring you stories that touch the heart, helping you find joy and value in everyday life. Join us and share the channel with friends to spread the good together. Thank you for taking the time to read this story. Your companionship is a great motivation for me to continue. Please leave a comment and let me know what you think.